Hello, and welcome to Stories from India, a podcast where we talk about myths, legends, and folk tales from India. I'm your host, Narad Muni, and I'm a mythological character myself. I have the gift of eternal life and knowledge of the past, the present, and the future. By profession, I'm a traveling musician and a storyteller. So the way I'm doing my job is by podcast. In this episode, we'll do a story of Vikram and Betaal. We'll meet three extraordinary girls who could have been excellent insurance adjusters. We have done 4 Vikram and Betaal episodes before, but you don't need to have heard any of them because these stories are all standalone. There's a framing narrative around all of the Vikram and Betaal stories, which you will find in episode 5, Kingly Duties. And if you haven't heard the previous episodes, or if you are not familiar with the concept, that's perfectly okay. I'll give you a summary. Vikramaditya, or Vik, was a wise king. Once, a rishi, or wise man, began giving him a daily gift, a precious gem disguised as a fruit. To repay him for the gifts, the king agreed to the rishi's request of fetching him a Betaal from the crematorium. A Betaal is a reanimated corpse, or a revenant. In some translations, it has been approximated to a vampire. The Betaal mostly loved hanging down from a tree, like a bat. He did not want to be captured. Nevertheless, the king was able to capture him pretty easily. The Betaal then told the king a story, which was actually a lateral thinking puzzle. The king could not resist answering the Betaal, but when he did, that allowed the Betaal to escape back to the tree. This happened about 25 times, and we have covered 4 of those stories. Today, we'll cover another one. We are back to the crematorium, again, with Vik walking towards the rishi, again, with the captured Betaal on his back, again. And the Betaal began his story again. And just like the previous times, with the premise that it was a long walk, and Vik looked upset. Maybe a story would lighten the mood. Climbing the tree again for the 5th time that night, and after a hard day's work running the kingdom, was not exactly what Vik had in mind. But he didn't object. Speaking would allow the Betaal to escape again. He shook his head to show his disapproval, but the Betaal ignored him and began his story. Once upon a time, said the Betaal, there was a king in a faraway land. Why does every one of his stories involve a king? Wondered Vik, but he did not say. The Betaal continued. Amongst his subjects was an old man, Musafir, and his 3 daughters. Musafir wanted to go on a pilgrimage, but there were logistical difficulties. And to solve those, he sought an audience with the king. Namaste, Your Majesty, said Musafir, greeting the king. I am the winner of the kingdom's weekly poem contest. Your officers promised me an all-expenses-paid pilgrimage, but they don't want to pay for my daughters. Quite right, said the king. You won the contest, not your daughters. But sir, I can't leave them behind. Who will take care of them? Can't they take care of themselves? They look old enough to me, said the king. Sir, all 3 of them are blind. I can't leave them alone." I see," said the king. "They could live with the queen's maids until you return. Is that acceptable?" Musafir agreed readily, and the girls nodded. "In that case," said the king, "I command them to live with the queen's maids until you return. And I command you to go on your pilgrimage. And I command you all to have fun." "Thank you, Your Majesty," said Musafir. "I have a suggestion. My daughters might be of use to you. They each have a skill, a special sense, special powers of perception." And indeed, the daughters did have that. The sisters were standing together, nudging each other and whispering to each other. Let's just call them Pehli, Dusri, and Tisri. Pehli nudged her sister on the right. "Dusri, I don't like that awful pigsty smell," she whispered. "Shh," replied her sister on the right. "I don't like it either, but it's from the king himself. We have to tolerate him. Maybe the queen won't smell as much. And don't call me Dusri, I'm Tisri. So much for your powers of perception." The king said, "Clearly, they're not very special if it doesn't help them take care of themselves in your absence. Off with you now," he said to Musafir. Musafir left on his journey. Pehli, Dusri, and Tisri settled in the queen's maid's quarters. Things were fine for a while. And then, one day, a horse trader came in, asking to sell his finest horse to the king. The king saw the horse and immediately wanted to buy it. For one thing, the king was tempted by what he thought was the unbelievably once-in-a-lifetime low price of just 999 rupees and 99 paise. It seemed like an offer too good to be true. Just as the horse trader was preparing the transfer of ownership paperwork, the king happened to notice Pehli passing by. He summoned her, remembering what Musafir had said. "Hey, Pehli, I'm planning to buy this horse here. What do you think?" People in court shook their heads, thinking the king had gone crazy, consulting a blind girl for her opinion of a horse. But they were about to be surprised. Pehli concentrated for a while, and then said, "How much are you being paid to keep him?" The king replied, "That's not how a purchase works. Let me explain. When party A wishes to relinquish ownership of goods, cattle, real estate, or securities, they find party B who wishes to attain ownership of said goods, cattle, real estate, or securities in exchange for fiat money or other goods." "Sir, with all due respect, I understand what a purchase is. What I'm getting at is that this horse is a white elephant." The king paused for a while and said, "No, I definitely see a grey horse." Pehli replied, "Sir, I did not mean that literally. I mean the horse is not an asset, it's a liability. You'd go crazy feeding him and changing his shoes, but you'll get nothing out of him. And this horse trader of yours knows it. He smells of guilt." And I said horse trader in a sarcastic way, in case you didn't catch that. At this, the horse trader broke down. He fell to his feet and begged for mercy. He was a rich guy who had become a poor guy, having spent all of his money on maintaining this horse. At last, he couldn't stand it anymore and decided to make some money out of the horse by bringing him to a neighboring kingdom. This kingdom, in fact, to try and sell him here. The king was impressed with Pehli. She rushed back to Dusri and Tisri and told them the whole story. Again, she complained about the odor of pigs from the king. A few days later, a very similar thing happened with Dusri. This time, it was a chariot salesman who was trying to pass off a used chariot with lots of miles on it, as if it were a new one. Dusri could pretty much sense the chariot's driving history and all the accidents that it had been in, and the hasty cover-up jobs that the owner had put it through. She too returned to her sisters with thanks from the king. And she too complained to her sisters about the strong smell of pigs. As you can guess, the same thing happened to Tisri as well. But this time, with weapons. They were terrible weapons that just wouldn't work. Bows that wouldn't shoot arrows, and swords that couldn't cut paper. You'd think by now the king would have learned a lesson from his experiences with the horse and with the chariot. But he hadn't. He needed Tisri to prevent him from wasting his money. The king was not ungenerous. He ordered a bunch of gifts for the girls when Musafir finally returned and was ready to take them home. The girls, in the king's presence, strangely looked like they might throw up. Not the reaction the king had been expecting. It seemed almost as if they were smelling a pigsty or something, which was impossible because this was the throne room. What could smell of pigs here? Before they could leave, however, the king asked Musafir a question. They're all your girls, and they have this sixth sense. They must have gotten it from you. Sir, that completely ignores the possibility that my wife was the one who... Of course, said the king. Now, if your wife had the powers, this story will end quietly with you going home and leading your life. But we are in a Vikram and Betaal story. So there is a plot twist coming up. I can feel it. Is that the plot twist? That you have such powers too? Your logic is unimpeachable, sir, said Musafir. I do have those powers. Then tell me about me. I command it, said the king. Pehli, Dusri and Tisri shook their heads vigorously at their dad. But he ignored them. He told the king the truth. Your Majesty was born in a pigsty. Your father was actually the keeper of the pigs, not the previous king, as everybody thinks. The king flew into a rage and had Musafir executed on the spot. That's the end of the story, said the Betaal. Now tell me, Vic, whose action was justified? The king executing Musafir, or Musafir speaking the truth? That's a trick question, replied Vikram. You're presenting those two options, but neither is right. The king was wrong to execute Musafir. It was an overreaction. A day or two in prison would have taught Musafir a lesson. Musafir was wrong, even though he spoke the truth. He should have chosen his words carefully. I'm sure he got carried away by his daughter's successes and thought that he might be rewarded as well for showing off his powers and speaking the truth. He really should have learned from his daughters. They had figured out the king's secret, but they managed to hide it from him over weeks. Musafir couldn't manage to keep it a secret for just a few minutes. You're absolutely right, Vikram, said the Betaal. And because you've been speaking, I'm going to now leave. See you back on the tree. The Betaal flew off. Vikram obviously followed him and captured him again and heard other stories. But those are for future episodes. That's all for now. The names I used for the characters are in line with the role they play. Musafir means traveler, and Pehli, Dusri, and Tisri are the Hindi words for first, second, and third. Check out the other Vikram and Betaal episodes that I've linked in the show notes. With the next episode, we'll have completed 1 whole year. Yes, it's been 1 whole year since we started the podcast. It's been an incredible journey, and I want to thank you very much for your support. Your feedback has helped in making this show a success. In the next episode, we'll do a folktale from Bengal. It's about a boy who had the moon on his forehead. Yeah, a brilliant shiny object right on his forehead. As you can imagine, there are going to be a few Harry Potter references in the story. If you have comments or suggestions, or if there are particular stories you'd like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com or tweet at sfipodcast. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. And again, thanks to all of you listeners for your continued support and your feedback over the last 1 year. It's been phenomenal. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. I'll see you next time.